Welcome to the College Admission TV Presidential Podcast. We sit down with passionate leaders in education for their thoughts and insights in today's world. We are excited to have as our guest Dr. Kent Trachte, president of Lycoming College in Williamsport, Pennsylvania.
One of the questions I always like to be able to touch upon, your personal journey and really learning about the mentors that helped shape your path.
Yeah, so Marla sent me some of the questions, and so I reflected upon that one. And part of what I thought about is how far back do I want to go, and where do I want to start? And I think I'm going to go back and kind of begin with by saying that my career in higher education has really had three phases to it. The first phase was as a faculty member, full-time faculty member on a tenure track, teaching international relations and foreign policy. That was followed by a second phase where I moved in to administration, combination of really academic and student life administration. And then, of course, this final phase as president of Lycoming College, and I'm now in my 11th year. So at each one of those moments, there were different mentors. And I'm not going to go into extraordinary depth, but I'll just hit a couple of them. When I first went to graduate school, I was in a master's degree program and thought that I was probably going to use that master's degree program to become a practitioner in public policy with perhaps a focus on foreign policy. And there was a particular faculty member by the name of Mickey East who saw something in me, invited me to co-design a course with him and teach that course in the subsequent semester. And that work with Mickey and his mentorship was really what catalyzed me into moving from a career in public policy to a career in higher education, initially as a faculty member. So I had that time as a faculty member, and I ended up at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and had some part of my responsibilities were to coordinate an international relations minor or track. And so I had some administrative responsibilities. And there were a couple of deans and colleagues, and I was trying to remember their names recently, who said to me, "You're pretty good at this administrative thing. Why don't you consider the possibility of going in that direction?" And my wife is also an academic, and so we were balancing two-career family, and so that exploration led me to take a position at Franklin and Marshall at what was that time called Dean of Freshmen. In that role, I was mentored, first of all, by a vice president by the name of Alice Drum, who really helped me understand how to manage a large group of people, how to move objectives forward in an academic environment, build consensus, and so on and so forth. And then Franklin and Marshall hired a fellow by the name of John Fry to become president of Franklin and Marshall. And John said to me one day, "Have you ever thought about being a college president?" And I know one of your questions is, when did you think about it? That was when I thought about it. So I was in my 50s before the idea of becoming a college president presented itself to me. Otherwise, I was just kind of following each opportunity in my own personal evolution, and not really with a game plan toward, I want to be a college president someday, and so these are calculated steps that I'm taking to prepare myself. John did say to me, however, that I have this new position called the Dean of the College, which brings together responsibilities in both academic and student life. And he said, this will prepare you well, both to be a successful president and to be a strong candidate. And he was right. So those are a couple of critical moments where individuals pointed me in directions that were those kind of three phases of my career and led me to being here now.
What now? Do you teach today, or do you have time?
I do not teach anymore. When I was at Franklin and Marshall, I continued to teach during the entire time I was an administrator, including at the end when I was in a vice president's position. And what I did was I co-taught with faculty members so that in the event that something took me away from the classroom, I would know that there would be somebody there. And the last course I taught, I partnered with different faculty members on the idea of citizenship. And part of that was to sort of connect what we do at liberal arts colleges to the mission of liberal arts colleges in preparing young people to be engaged members of society. And what does that mean? And we explored that in a lot of different ways, both highly theoretical and somewhat experiential as well. But I haven't taught for the last 11 years, unfortunately.
Now, Lycoming College, are you a liberal arts college?
We are.
Yeah, and so how do you explain that to students and parents? Is that clear to them what a liberal arts college is today?
I think it is clear to most of them what a liberal arts college is today. And what we stress are really three different things, I would say. First of all, that one of the things that, and this is nothing about this is novel, but these are the themes we use. One of the things that a liberal arts college is really good at is preparing students to think critically across a range of problems. Because we require you to become somewhat familiar with the humanities and somewhat familiar with the sciences and social sciences and so on. And what we stress is that in the world, technical or practical skills often evolve as technology or knowledge evolves. But what this liberal arts education does is it allows you to adapt and to be a continuous learner in the workplace. The second thing that we talk about, which is, I think, particularly important in our current historical moment, is that we're also preparing you to be thoughtful and engaged citizens. Part of that, again, is learning a variety of different viewpoints, trying to understand the viewpoint of others. And then that connects third to the stress on having an experience of interacting with people from different cultures, so that in our world that is increasingly composed of people from diverse identities, you can navigate those diverse identities, whether it be in the workplace, in your community, in your neighborhood, or as you engage in our democracy. So we talk about all of those things. At one point, and I haven't done this for a little while, there was a book called The Fuzzy and the Techie. And I can't remember who the author is right now. But the author was somebody who was a Stanford graduate who had been very successful in the high-tech industry. What he argued in his book is that technological innovation requires both those who have a broad liberal arts education, as well as those who have technical skills. And he says those with the technical skills are generally not the innovators. The innovators are those who have a broader understanding of human nature, of sometimes the how political processes impact things and economics, and that when you bring those together, that's where the magic happens, and that both are still in high demand, even though we think about this being an increasingly technological economy that we're in. And I've used that often in talking to parents and students at admissions events.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you're meeting with students and parents at admissions events, what is the most frequent question that you get from prospective families? And maybe it's different from a parent versus a student.
Yeah, I think it probably is. You know, I think from a parent, the obvious question that you get is, how is a degree in a liberal arts discipline, particularly if the student chooses to do something in the humanities, going to lead to a job and a career for my son or daughter? I think from students, they're more concerned about, am I going to fit in at this place? Are there going to be opportunities that are interesting and will allow me to grow and explore myself and who I'm going to become? So with the parents, one of the things in terms of that parent questions, one of the things we did in our 2014 strategic plan was to rethink how we do career advising, and to create a new model or a different model of career advising where we embed career advisors in clusters of disciplines, and where those career advisors develop competency or expertise in answering that question for those specific disciplines. And we also expect those career advisors to see students as their clients. And so when parents ask me that question, I talk to them about this model of career advising that we've evolved, which is not a passive sit back and wait for the student to come. And another integral element of that is working with the individual student to ensure that they get experiential opportunities that build credentials so they can compete. And we have something called an enhanced academic experience that is basically an experiential thing like an internship or study abroad or doing research with somebody that builds a skill set. Now, with the students, I don't know that anything that I say as a actually kind of 70-year-old male is really going to be persuasive to them. I think what we do with our students is we provide prospective students, we make sure they have an opportunity to interact with our current students and to hear our current students' voices. And we do this all the way from our technology platform to the campus visit. But what I do tell students is that given our size, given the commitment of our faculty, we don't have any graduate students online, so they're committed to undergraduate. Given the richness of the opportunities we have available, you can come here and write your own story. This is the kind of place, it's not cookie cutter. You're going to work with a faculty member, a career advisor, and you're going to be able to write your own story and explore the things that you're passionate about. So that's how I try to respond to the students.
Well, and you spoke about the size of the institution, that you're fully focused on residential undergraduate students. And, oftentimes, when diversity and equity and inclusion comes up, I often hear that without belonging, it doesn't mean a lot. And so can you speak to what an advantage it is for Lycoming to have that small campus base where everyone's being taught in front of that, faculty member, and really feel like, hey, they belong. Because I would imagine, you probably know most of the students, and it's a very intimate experience versus a state flagship. But there's nothing wrong with that, but just a far different experience.
Yeah. So I think more to the point is, I would be confident in saying that every one of my students knows one or more faculty members well, knows a career advisor or academic services advisor, or a coach, or a student life staff member well, and that those people are, really directly impacting their lives. Yes, I do know students, but it's really the fact that you get to know those folks, whereas at a large flagship university, you might not ever get to know a faculty member well. You might not ever step into the career services office or what have you. So, I think that's really the key piece of it. Now, it's interesting the question you ask. When I arrived at Lycoming in 2013, only about 12% of our students were domestic students of color. By 2018, we had 30% plus of our students as domestic students of color. And we did that in part by partnering with both high-performing urban charter schools that are located around reformed, if you will, urban charter schools, and then also access organizations. And in those settings, students from, underrepresented backgrounds get a personalized attention that is not common in the urban public school setting, where there are huge numbers of students in the regular public school setting. And so those counselors and folks are looking for campuses like ours, where there is that individual connectivity. And that's, where you get to know not just other students, but you get to know that faculty member and so on and so forth. That's all part of belonging. Now, having said that, we are not perfect. And we know that we have more work to do. And it's a emphasis in our 2021 strategic plan to continue to progress with a commitment that all of our students have an opportunity to succeed, and that all of our students are getting similar outcomes, regardless of the background and experiences they bring. It's also the case that obviously student organizations that represent different experiences and identities are also part of that sense of belonging. And we've had a real growth in those kinds of student organizations. But I absolutely agree with your general premise. If you are intentional about it and create a culture, size allows you to cultivate a sense of small size allows you to cultivate a sense of belonging, but you have to be intentional about it.
Now, when you look at career paths, how are you engaging with the local community and with businesses to really help make sure students are career ready?
Yeah. So that also has been a point of emphasis and was another prong, if you will, of that revision of career services and the emphasis on experiential learning that we put into both the curriculum and the co-curriculum in 2013 and 2014. And so we've been very intentional about having the staff in career services, as well as our faculty and our alumni folks, reach out and create connections in the local community that are part of providing our students with those experiences. One of the first things we did is we created a Williamsport. It's a WISE program, Williamsport Something Experience. And we went out and intentionally cultivated a whole full range of employers, from businesses through nonprofits through government. But we've also worked beyond the immediate space to cultivate research opportunities for our students at larger universities and to also cultivate through our alums employment opportunities well beyond the area of Williamsport. And we have funding available to help students do summer internships where that might be an unpaid summer internship. We've had some of our donors endow a program where we can help the student pursue a highly attractive unpaid internship. So that's very much an emphasis of what we're doing. Yes, locally, but also beyond the region, tapping our alumni network and other connections that we have as well.
And how early in a student's path, how early can they engage in an internship?
We have quite a few students that start doing internships sophomore year.
Okay.
So again, we have, we've created something called a Center for Enhanced Academic Experiences. And it has internships, doing research primarily with our faculty, although some off-campus opportunities, and also international study. All three of those things are part of it. And quite a few of the more ambitious students will start in the summer after their first year, or they'll get into a practicum course as a sophomore that has embedded in it some kind of internship opportunity. We think it's important for students to start connecting their career thinking and their career opportunities early on and not wait till, second semester senior year, where unfortunately there are, my experience historically was there are a lot of students who came wandering in second semester senior year, said, my mom said I better get into career services because she doesn't have the bedroom at home available to me.
Well, and I really, when I hear about your career advisors and when I hear about your student life staff, who I would imagine have pretty distinct roles in that life of a student.
Yes.
How do you make sure with those components and others, as we're talking, how do you make sure that students, let's just take freshmen, when freshmen come in, it's a new experience, especially if it's first generation, it's a very new experience. Yep. So how do you make sure that they stay the course, not just academically, but that they don't get too homesick and kind of leave the path that they're on to graduate?
Yeah. So of course we don't get 100%, right? But we get a very high percentage that persist to that second year, somewhere in the 85% range for us, persist to the second year. Some of what, I don't know that a lot of what we do here is absolutely novel, but the core of what we do in the first year experience is a first year seminar taught by a faculty member that has an academic component or theme to it, but which is connected to a bunch of sort of broader component elements, like having a career advisor come in and do a workshop. We have something called a passport program that we introduced, where the faculty in the first year seminar program will give students extra credit if they go to a certain number of events in Williamsport, on campus, go to career services, take advantage of resources, so that there's an incentive created for them to do that. And then, of course, in the residence halls themselves, there's the traditional support that's there. We have continued to evolve our kind of early alert system, if you will. And we're now at a point where even on a small campus, we have a software program where a faculty member, a staff member, resident assistant can make an entry if a student seems to be struggling one way or another. And then our academic services deans will intervene early on and call that student in and try to work with them to figure out what's going on and start getting them connected to resources if our structural programs aren't working. So again, the advantages of being small. It's hard to become just a number.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you're out there trying to win students, for lack of a better way to put it, there's a lot of competition in higher education. Many would say it's a saturated market, especially up in the Northeast. So how do you combat that? I mean, is it a recruitment strategy, that goes beyond the state? Is it, what does that look like to combat, the cliff and the competition?
Yeah. So there's multiple elements, as you might imagine. When I took office in 2013, we started a strategic planning process. Actually, we had kind of started even before I took office, because it's not that far from Franklin and Marshall to Lycoming, and I was named about 6 months before I took office. And my predecessor was kind enough to allow me to come to Lycoming and explore things and begin to make connections. But we did an analysis. We had data available to us from a variety of sources where we could look and see where did our prospective students, what were the priorities for our prospective students, what things mattered most, and how did they compare Lycoming to our competition. And we utilized that data to identify a number of things. In our case, one of those things was our facilities were viewed as not competitive with our peers. The institution hadn't made significant investments in facilities for 12 or 15 years. Facilities matter. When people walk on campus, if the labs look like they're, like if they're from a rural area and or they're from an urban area or suburban area and the science labs aren't as good as the ones in their high school, well, that's going to, leave a negative impression. So during my term, we've invested, which for a small campus is a lot, about $60 million in both building new facilities, but also renovating classrooms, science labs, residence halls, and the like. So, that was kind of one prong of it. The second prong, which we talked about a little bit already, was building those relationships that helped us to begin recruiting not only a more diverse student body, but students that we were never recruiting before, right? Because they weren't even aware of us. And that's really a national strategy where we have partners in Texas and Chicago and California. Texas is now the fifth in terms of most represented states among our student body, and it's been largely done through that network of partnerships. The other key prong, of course, is to look at financial aid and look at affordability. And are you making yourself affordable, and are you competitive on price, right? And so we had a campaign, and we made a high priority with creating more endowed scholarships, and we were able to raise for us a good amount of money, about $27 million, to endow additional scholarships. And our trustees have been willing to allocate more endowment draw to making sure we have competitive scholarships. And then, finally, the international market, I'm sure you've heard this from others, I think presents an opportunity. As an institution, we were starting to make progress pre-COVID. Then COVID just killed us in terms of being able to recruit international students. And now we're developing a kind of a post-COVID international recruitment approach, which includes partnering with some entities called Shorelight and Global Match that are helping to identify, seems like you've heard about them before, helping to identify students and giving us better matches. And, I think for pretty much all institutions, kind of Lycoming size, getting into that international market is important. And international families, especially their parents, are looking for that personalized attention that we can provide. Sometimes the students are looking for the glitz and glamour of the large urban area, but their parents are trying to direct them toward what we can provide. And we've had a number of international students who great experiences and now spokespersons, for us. Finally, we've added some new majors that didn't exist before. The most recent one is computer science, which has helped us. And one more thing, we had a very small number of athletic teams. We added brought back a couple of athletic teams, baseball and field hockey. We're looking at bringing back or adding a couple more. So you really got to be fighting on multiple fronts. You're absolutely right. Increasing, especially in the Northeast, highly competitive. You can't just put all your eggs in one basket.
Well, and for a school that it sounds like you've been able to fundraise.
Yes.
And so what is the secret sauce to successful fundraising?
That's a good question. I think I've heard some people, and to some extent it was the culture here when I arrived, say that communicating that we need your support or else we won't be able to do X, Y, or Z. And I have found that that is exactly the wrong way to approach it. Successful fundraising absolutely requires a vision. It requires an articulation of an ambition for the institution. It requires compelling ideas that people want to invest in. I think that donors are increasingly thinking like investors, and they have an opportunity to put their money where a difference can be made. Okay. So when we got here, one of the things we said to folks is Lycoming had become a national liberal arts college, that U.S. News category, but we were like 160th or something of that sort. And a vision that we articulated that people came to believe is that we had all of the ingredients and the people and the faculty and the alumni needed to become a top 100 institution. And that as we started to move up, we started to build momentum in that way. As people started to see the physical transformations and came back to campus and saw, wow, things really look spectacular, as they saw, some of the new majors. So a compelling idea and then executing to create momentum so that people believe in you. That's absolutely how we approached it. We called ours toward a greater Lycoming. And it actually echoed back to an earlier historical period when the institution went from being a 2-year institution to a 4-year institution. But we sort of took it and brought it into, the contemporary world. So it's all about excitement and vision and then delivering so that momentum gets created, in my view.
Yeah. So how did you get interested, or how did you know when you look at international relations and foreign policy, how does somebody get into that and realize this is the path I want to take?
International relations and foreign policy? How did I get into that path?
I mean, do you remember a teacher, whether it be in high school or what have you, there you go, you know what? I like this.
So I always had, for some reason, an interest in politics, and I don't remember what catalyzed that interest in politics. It could have had something to do with the era in which I kind of came to consciousness. So I'm old enough to remember John Kennedy as president, and I'm old enough to remember Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and kind of that period of up until maybe the assassinations, which was a period of kind of optimism in terms of what was possible. When I went to college, I knew I had some interest in politics, and I took a course on comparative politics with a professor by the name of John Kemeny. No, wait a minute. No, that was the president. I can't remember the professor's name now, but I took a course with a professor on comparative politics, and we focused on France, England, and a couple of third world countries. And I was absolutely enthralled by what we were doing in terms of really understanding or comparing different political systems. And then I took a course in Introduction to International Relations, and it sort of deepened from there. So yes, absolutely, there were some professors that moved me along. And then there was my junior year, and this professor's name I do remember, David Baldwin. I was beginning to gravitate toward international relations. I did an independent study with David, and the first draft of the paper I gave him, he tore it apart, but he made me better, and he deepened my thinking and my understanding. So it was faculty members that I had in college that really both catalyzed and solidified that interest in international relations.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating, just the paths that students take to find what they love to do. And I mean, even with my oldest son, who's a freshman in high school, he talks about computer science, he talks about finance, but he's still trying to understand, well, what job can I get doing those? What does that mean? And so,
right.
Being able to do a deep dive into, take classes, get to be the access that you have to faculty, to presidents, to students, et cetera, take advantage of them while you're there.
And alumni. Colleges that are doing this stuff well are bringing alumni back to speak to classes, and we do a lot of that through our model, bringing alumni back who can really talk about not only what have their career pathways been, but how is that industry or field evolving, and what's going to be there now, 10 years from now, that might be exciting to the students. And so we try to do as much of that as we can, get engaged alumni as part of the experience that the students have. But no, you're right. And when I was a faculty member, so I'll tell you a little anecdote. When I turned 70 a couple summers ago, my wife put together a surprise birthday party for me. And what she did was she invited and there were about 15 or 18 students that I had taught at Clark University during my first 4 or 5 years as a faculty member, who apparently all felt that I had influenced them in significant and meaningful ways. And about 15 or 18 of them showed up for this surprise party that my wife put together. And we spent an afternoon, sitting on the patio in back of our house. And it was just, one of those times when I said, gosh, I guess some parts of my life have been meaningful and worthwhile, because all of them went out of their way to talk to me about when you did this or when you did that or when we had this conversation. And, it really influenced the direction that my life has taken. And they were, attorneys and business people and nonprofit leaders and so on and so forth. And so it really can be just incredibly rewarding to have that opportunity to engage and at this level, what you're doing is creating the funding, the infrastructure, so that other people can go and do what I did, 40 years ago. And you get a couple little opportunities to influence, but it's really about putting the larger structure in place, supporting our faculty and our staff in doing what I had the opportunity to do 40 years ago, so that when they turn 70, their students will come back and tell them how much they appreciated their experience with them.
Well, I mean, that's so exciting and that's so fulfilling. I mean, that's got to be so fulfilling as well.
It was.
So now, where do you see Lycoming College in 10 years?
That's well, first of all, I'll be retired by then. At 72, I'm not going to be working when I'm 82. But that's something that I've really been thinking pretty deeply about in my last 3 or 4 years here. And I've got maybe a couple years to go. How to position the institution in terms of where does it want to be 10 years from now. We've had in each of the strategic planning processes that we've undergone. So we did one that resulted in a 2014 plan, then we did another one that resulted in a 21 strategic plan. And we came out of each of those processes with all of our constituencies, trustees, faculty, alumni, staff, agreeing that being a residential undergraduate liberal arts institution was what we are good at, and that we wanted to continue to allocate our resources to what we do well and compete based on what we do well. Okay. But we had a pandemic since that 2021 strategic plan was put in place. I think we're still just beginning to understand the profound ways in which our culture, our economy, and our political system were altered by going through that 2-year experience. We have some ideas. We can see some things. We saw the economic disruption that continued, well into years after the pandemic. Many of our peer institutions have responded both prior to the pandemic and post-pandemic by saying we need to diversify what we do. And I'm sure you know that, they've started some online programs, or they've developed a handful of graduate programs that they think they can do well, or other opportunities of that sort. Okay. We're about to revisit at a retreat at the end of this month with our trustees. Do we need to think about diversification at Lycoming? Do we need to add majors, which is another thing that go outside of the liberal arts? That has to be a consensus that is not just involves the president, especially one that's not going to be here 10 years from now, but involves the trustees and the faculty. Most fundamentally, those two constituencies. Those are the two constituencies that have long-term relationships with an institution. So if it were up to me, I would say let's continue to compete on the basis of what we're really good at. Let's continue to invest in that and do it even better. Yes, we can add a major here or there that's reflects new knowledge. Yes, we can add some more sports teams. Nothing wrong with that. But let's continue to invest our resources in undergraduate residential liberal arts education. But we'll have to see where those constituents decide we should go.
Well, President Kent Trachte, hey, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I feel like we could talk all day. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been a fun conversation. I hope I've given you something worthwhile to integrate into the podcast that you're going to put together. Are you going to do podcasts with each one of your interviews? Or are you going to are you going to blend them together into one? How are you doing it?
Gosh, I love that idea about blending them into one. And so we keep them separate right now.
Okay.
But I'll tell you something. I always feel like it's our guests, just like you have today, that provides the great thought leadership. I mean, I feel like I have the easy job. I'm asking the questions and trying to navigate, the flow as best I can. But it's interesting because we have entertained the idea of bringing together even little snippets of answers to questions, and maybe a top 10 challenges in higher education, or what parents should really are really concerned about or asking, and kind of starting to blend all of them together. So maybe in the near future we'll do something like that. Right now we keep them separate, but I do like that idea a lot.
By the way, I do read Plexus on a regular basis. It's one of the daily emails that I receive, and I often read several of the articles. I think you guys do a good job.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. So make me look good, okay?
Hey, you did that all on your own, so thank you.
All right.
All
Have
right.
a good day.
You take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the College Admission TV Presidential Podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll bring you another insightful conversation with a distinguished leader in higher education.